This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 440, part 2, entitled, What do feminists and masculists have in common? Carrying straight on. Masculists want the divorce courts reformed, so that the basic assumption is that both partners in the marriage are FIPs, so that the woman is not expected by law to have the right to parasite off the money of her ex-husband, manslaving him for decades, which is so egregious to masculists that it's a war issue, a sex war between men and women. The toxicity of modern divorce is so great that in many countries today, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, and thus indirectly wipe out whole populations due to the crash in the birth rate. The masculists claim that young men are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites, making them so toxic for men that millions of young men who would love to be fathers don't dare be, because they utterly reject what the hated fluffy feminists have done to marriage and paternity. Young men see the 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids if they become fathers and say, fuck that, I'd rather live the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, lifestyle of not marrying, rejecting paternity and spending their money on themselves, than face those odds of losing my kids. End quote. Masculists see the fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts as indirect genociders who are wiping out whole populations, so have to be stopped with bullets if necessary in a sex war, since the level of hatred against fluffy feminists by masculists and divorce fathers is so great that the divorce courts have become a war issue. They have to be reformed, or millions of monoconscious feminists are going to be killed if masculine soldiers go out into the streets and shoot them. So it should be clear that it's not only feminists who are fighting for gender justice. The masculists are definitely doing the same. The masculists want parliamentary gender equality committees to be set up, comprised half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that gender injustices are dealt with equally, which is far from being the case today in a monoconscious intellectual climate in which nearly everyone thinks that gender injustice is only about women, whereas, given the above, it is clearly not the case. Masculists claim that women commit far greater gender injustices against men than vice versa, so it's urgent that the gender laws be menfaired, the divorce courts be menfaired, the para be legislated, etc. There are many gender laws that need to be passed in order to give men equal rights compared with women. Masculists feel that the feminist gender political pendulum has swung too far in women's favour, that is, a genocracy, so needs to be restored to its lowest equilibrium position by legislating more gender laws that are oriented towards men. Bullet. Both benefit from becoming bi-conscious. Being bi-conscious means that one has had both one's feminist and one's masculist consciousness raised. That is, one has learned about feminist and masculist ideas, so that one is not monoconsciously biased with a knowledge only of feminist ideas, as are most people at the time of writing, that's May 2021. How do men benefit from having women being bi-conscious? In many ways. In a bi-conscious world, the massive gender injustices suffered by men would be removed, the divorce courts would be reformed, women would be FIPs, the para would be legislated, parliaments would be bi-conscious, dealing equally with men's and women's issues, etc. If a woman becomes bi-conscious, then she is much more likely to have a boyfriend, and further down the road, more likely to have a baby. Monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy, since they are angry at men for the ways that men oppress women. but are ignorant of how women oppress men, so she behaves as a misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitch towards men, thus making her repulsive to men, who then punish her by totally ignoring her, forcing her to rot on the shelf, suffering manlessness, so no love, no sex, no baby, and spat at by men, especially by bi-conscious masculists who see her as a misandrist bitch. A bi-conscious feminist, on the other hand, has, by definition, had both her feminist and her masculist consciousnesses raised. So has her feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women more or less cancelled by a masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. So she'll be much nicer to men, much more approachable by men. So she will be much more likely to have a boyfriend and hence benefit from being loved, sexed, orgasmed, etc., and hence be a lot happier. Recent research shows that the most unhappy group of people in modern culture are professional women in their 40s who are manless and childless. They are bitter because they feel that life has passed them by. A lot of their loneliness is their own fault, since they were so monoconsciously feminazi towards men that men rejected her. And now she's paying the price. She's in her 40s, so her youthful sexual attractiveness has dwindled away, so that men no longer desire her by sight, so that she has become invisible to men. So she pines away in her lonely apartment, sexless, loveless, babyless, and utterly miserable. Masculists push young women to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, so that men are prepared to be fathers again. But until the divorce courts have been reformed and made men fair, that is not going to happen. Young men increasingly give the finger to marriage and paternity, while the monoconscious fluffy feminists are still in control of the divorce courts. So the more young women are bi-conscious, the more likely they will be to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, so that they will be in a stronger position to persuade men to give them their sperm, which is not happening today, as an ever higher proportion of young men refuse to give young women their sperm, merely pumping and dumping women, but utterly rejecting marriage and paternity, since these institutions have been made toxic by the hated fluffy feminists in the divorce courts. As large numbers of young women become bi-conscious, the fluffy feminists will become as hated by young women as they are by men, by masculists. Masculists are telling young women that their babylessness is indirectly due to the toxicity of the divorce courts, controlled by the hated fluffy feminists, so that these young women should blame and hate the fluffy monoconscious feminists for causing their babylessness. When both sexes are strongly bi-conscious, the divorce courts will be reformed, made men fair, and young women will be more likely to have babies again, making them happier. Bullet. Both sexes will benefit from menfairing the gender laws. This follows on from the above point. If the gender laws are men-faired, then obviously men will benefit, since the menfairing of these laws is aimed directly at men, aiming to liberate men from the severe oppressions of manslavery, no para, etc. But how will the menfairing of the gender laws benefit women? This was discussed to some extent in the previous point. For example, bi-conscious women will be more likely to have boyfriends, and young women will be more likely to have babies, since in a men-faired society, men will be more willing to be fathers again, since they know that they will not be financially crucified in a hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court. In a society which is men-faired, given the almost universal recognition of feminist ideas across the world, will mean that the world has become bi-conscious, so that both sexes will see the importance of creating real gender justice for both sexes. If men are happier, women will be happier, and if women are happier, men will be happier. Today's monoconscious feminists are very unhappy because they don't have the gender justice they want. Monoconscious feminism has turned them into misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitches whom men find repulsive, so punish them by forcing them to rot on the shelf, turning these monoconscious, non-bi-conscious feminists into miserable, lonely, manless, sexless, loveless, babyless misanthropes, hated by everyone. When monoconscious feminists convert themselves into bi-conscious feminists by supporting the menfairing of the gender laws, then masculists, who in time will be most men, in the same kind of way that most women today have been influenced by monoconscious feminist ideas, will behave a lot more positively towards these bi-conscious feminists who see that gender oppression is a two-way street and have real sympathy for the gender plight of men, agreeing with the masculists that manslavery is a moral abomination, that the para needs to be legislated, etc. Instead of men rejecting monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, men will embrace them, literally, and be motivated to be nice to women, because women, that is, bi-conscious feminists, will be nice to them, due to them having had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, due to the menfairing of the gender laws. Actually, this is a bit of a chicken and egg situation, since you can argue that millions of women will first need to become bi-conscious before the gender laws are menfaired. But there will also be millions of other women who will be slower in making themselves bi-conscious, who will be driven by the menfairing of the gender laws to behave more nicely towards men, since the whole zeitgeist will have become by then bi-conscious. ... These are 5 things that feminists and masculists have in common. There are probably many more, but the above are a good start. Feminists and masculists need not be enemies, although there are plenty of good reasons why, on balance, that masculists have such a contempt for monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, labelling them as such. But the relations between the feminists and the masculists are not entirely antagonistic. There are some points of agreement, so hopefully those common points will serve as the springboard for the further bi-consciousness raising of monoconscious feminists, so that the two sexes can fall back into each other's arms again. But that day seems a long way off, since nearly all feminists today are monoconscious. The masculists still have a ton of work to do to create a world that is largely bi-conscious. So masculists, roll up your sleeves and get to work. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 440 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.